Before Katrina, we had 7,200 units of public housing in the city of New Orleans, and we had I know we had 4 projects that were already undergoing transformation, 4 public housing development sites under Hope 6 projects. And so those 7,200 units, there were only 5,146 that were occupied at the time of Katrina. And it wasn't because we didn't have this tremendous need for public housing. It wasn't that they weren't needed. It was that there was already a big push to redevelop public housing. And then when Katrina came, a lot of that kind of got on steroids.
They put up fences, barbed wire, security guards, and SWAT teams to stop women and children from going in to their own homes. And we fought that battle for almost 3 years, trying to get the right that everybody else had to go into your own home and be able to clean it up and fix it up and come back home. And that was denied to public housing. And in the end, the last major battle was fought before the city council. And that last battle, you would have thought you were in Selma, Alabama, or you were facing Bull Connors. I mean, people were brutalized, they were maced, they were beat up, and that basically epitomizes how far the city was willing to go to keep poor people out of New Orleans.
Public housing had been created under a de jure segregated system, and so there were serious inequities in the public housing program and keeping people in highly dense living situations and not renovating the units and not making sure the units were safe and decent and habitable. There were 5,000 units that were demolished after Katrina, and it was a very controversial process, but the rationale behind it was that individuals had very poor living conditions and they were concentrated by race and by economics, and that was true, but the challenge was in relying on the private market to make up for that loss of affordable housing. It was perhaps naive.
There were no requirements anymore that you do 1-for-1 replacement of each deeply affordable housing unit and replacing it with another type of unit with that subsidy. We ended up with, almost 10 years post-Katrina, a very dramatic loss in public housing units and deeply affordable units for those most in need based on income.
Our way of replacing those units has largely been to provide vouchers to these families. And so then the question arises, when we provide vouchers to people who are being displaced in public housing, are people moving to areas of greater opportunity? And are people using the voucher to exercise choice and exercise opportunity? Or are they being resegregated and reconcentrated?
So the promise of the Housing Choice Voucher Program is that tenants are going to have wider access to opportunity. We're going to end sort of chronically poor, segregated neighborhoods of the city, and people are going to integrate both economically and also racially. And that hasn't happened.
What we're seeing is a lot of clustering of vouchers in Orleans Parish, and we're seeing that although we have a little more access to neighborhoods of opportunity than we did 10 years ago, we are still lagging behind the nation in terms of people using vouchers and their ability to use them to access neighborhoods of opportunity.
Housing Choice Voucher tenants are overwhelmingly concentrated in chronically poor and racially segregated neighborhoods of the city. The Fair Housing Center conducted an audit to look for discrimination against voucher holders. And what we found, we looked at 100 properties and looked at the ways in which an African American using a voucher and a white person using a voucher might face insurmountable barriers to renting a house. And what we found was that 82% of the time, the person using the voucher either was refused housing outright, or the landlord placed such insurmountable terms and conditions that the tenant couldn't possibly meet it.
So where are they now? A lot of them have been dispersed to the New Orleans East, the outermost parts of the city. A lot of them have taken vouchers and are living in the old rundown property that nobody wanted. And I would think at least 50% of them are stuck in some faraway city, missing New Orleans, but understanding that economically they can never come back.
So the HUD data on disaster vouchers indicates that public housing residents and other tenants that were using a disaster voucher in the aftermath of Katrina landed in every jurisdiction in the United States.
The incident in McKinney, Texas that recently came out on the national media, really brought home to me some of those stories that we would hear at that time. Using, why don't you go back to Section 8 as a racial slur. That's what a lot of our displaced families would hear in the communities that they went to.
The Fair Housing Act was enacted in order to prevent the harms that come from segregated communities. And unfortunately, we're still seeing some of those harms today. With the recent events in Ferguson, Baltimore, the McKinney Pool incident, all of these things may have been prevented if we were living in more integrated communities in which people had the opportunity to have social interactions with people from different backgrounds.